Don't let rampant politics and clusterfuckery ruin all your projects and your sanity. Smooth ugly penny lines and make it all make sense. Get experience by osmosis here on Corporate Underpants.
I'm still not good at that transition because I'm sitting here laughing at my own intro video because I just cracked myself up. Hi, everybody. Welcome to Corporate Underpants Live. It is Thursday, March 13th. It is 12 p.m. noon here in the Pacific Northwest in Seattle. And this is the live recording of a really fun, fascinating, crazy-making story that I think you guys are going to love. First of all, Corporate Underpants, it's my brainchild, my love, and it is a place for me to finally talk about all the things that have become clear to me as I become more and more senior in the product and UX world. And those things are about how critical it is as we become more senior not to ignore politics, not to ignore stuff that's going on around us and just focus on the double diamond or the processes that we think are so critically important as we come up through our careers, but that there's something way bigger. There's something bigger that can impact everything, and that it is a skill and a perspective and a way of looking at work and at our own roles that can make us much more powerful in the world of business and in our own careers. So that's what Corporate Underpants is all about. And I have a fabulous guest today with a killer story. So I'm not going to waste any time. I'm going to bring on Mike Neff, ladies and gentlemen, Mike Neff. Hey,
Hello.
hi, how are you?
I'm doing great. I loved your intro. Things don't always go right, and it's up to us to decide how we're going to deal with that.
Yep, clusterfuckery. I wrote the lyrics to that, and then I put it into an AI music generator, and the very first music it put out was that, like, French bistro ridiculousness, and I was like, "Done. I'll take it." Okay, and that's an interesting point about AI. I didn't want it to write the song for me, but I'm not good at music. AI isn't gonna take over everything creative, it's just not. So, my words, plus a little AI seasoning. Mike, where are you joining from?
I'm joining from San Francisco, California.
Alright, tell people who you are.
I am Mike Neff. I'm a product design leader. I tend to work on pretty technical products. I'm really centered and empathy driven. And that's why I tend to work on technical products is those are challenging problems with interesting people who oftentimes don't get the attention of design. So I love to apply it there.
So is that mostly like B2B stuff, do you think? Or is it like really complicated products sometimes that are B2C?
In my experience, it's primarily B2B, though I have worked on products that are two-sided marketplace, B2B, B2C. And again, the B2B things have tended to be pretty technical. Data products, distributed systems, engineering products, that's a mouthful to say. Though my last role was fun, I got to work on tools for designers and user researchers, which is great. I love working on tools for my own people.
Yes. We are the users. Hey,
That's right. That's
we're
right.
never
Fine.
supposed to think that. But what happens in a world where you're not supposed to think of yourself as the user, and yet you are?
I know. All the rules of thumb of don't design the product for yourself. You have to be even more disciplined when you actually end up in that role.
Actually, that's a really interesting. We hadn't talked about that in advance, but it just made my mind go sideways. Like, how do you do that? How do you design a product for yourself when you're not supposed to design a product for yourself?
You have to be really disciplined and talk to your customers and listen to your customers and not let intuition creep in. All the things that we normally do as design and product folks with our other stakeholders, but we have to make sure that we're holding ourselves accountable even more.
Yes. Even when we do hold ourselves accountable and do research, we have to understand what those above us think and want out of the product because they're always designing for themselves and their assumptions about users, which isn't necessarily a bad thing unless you don't know what's happening. So right now you're exploring your next big adventure too, which is exciting. I can't wait to see what you're going to choose. But you reached out a few weeks ago and I feel like I've known you for 27 years, but actually we're relatively new best friends. And you had heard an episode of Corporate Underpants and as a senior person reached out and it's exactly what keeps me going with this. So tell me why you reached out after listening to an episode.
Yeah, I had seen a few of your corporate underpants posts on LinkedIn, and I said, this really resonates with me. I run into these things in my roles all the time. I'll go give the podcast a listen. And I immediately binged all of the available episodes because they were so on point. You had really good guests, and their perspectives and the problems that they've been solving are so relevant to like myself and leadership roles. And so yeah, I ended up reaching out to you afterward and just saying, "Gosh, I really wish that I, with all the learning that I have now, could go back in time and coach myself around these things that I've learned, the stuff that you're covering on corporate underpants, because those lessons they're like hard won and it takes a lot of energy and wasted time to learn them." So
Yeah, and that's the experience by osmosis part. That's why that line is in the song. We do have hard-won lessons, and there's some things that experience you can't trade, like, you can't just learn by listening, you have to learn by experience, but there are also some things that you can learn from people who have had experiences, things that make some weird stuff less surprising when you run into it, less frustrating, and less just confusing, which is and that's what keeps me going because I think as senior people, we get to the stage where we start to intuitively realize that to become really good, we have to start managing up as well as we do manage across, sideways, and manage down. And that is a way different skill set than we ever thought it was.
yep.
So when we talked, your story was insane in the best and worst possible way. So I'm so glad you're willing to share it. And this is an experience we're going to call it with Acme Incorporated. And actually the Roadrunner and Roadrunner and
Wile E. Coyote.
Wile E. Coyote. Yeah, it's apt. So you might keep coming back to that. So tell us about your experience at Acme. How did you start? What were you doing? What was your job?
Yeah. So I had been hired because the company was working on going public. The design team needed to scale to support that. We had a lot of work to do. And I was being hired as an early manager on a team that hadn't had a lot of design leaders. I was excited by that. It lined up. I had some search criteria in that search where working for a company that went public and having that experience was something that I hadn't had in the past and I really wanted to do. Some other
Might be,
great Yeah, and some other great boxes as far as the opportunity that I wanted to check, they all lined up, and so I was really excited to go do this, and I signed up for that, but one of the things that I, in hindsight, realized is that I assumed that part of why I was hired was to create products that had longevity, that were user-centered, that created, like, business flywheel and all these kinda, like, business terms, but essentially, like, you hire a product designer to make great products for the company to have long-term success. And
and that's a
what
pretty fair assumption. That's not going out too far on a limb. That
but but I realized in hindsight, I realized that was an assumption. And I didn't ask those questions in my interviews. I didn't ask that question when I was onboarding.
what question?
The question, am I being hired right now to lead teams that build long-term business value and deliver great products for customers?
Okay, but I think
That was the assumption.
if you had, probably the answer you would have gotten no matter what would have been yes.
I think so too, and I think that that is one of the really hard things I have in my job searches. I've run into a sort of a growing list of these things that are really hard to evaluate for, and I've really realized that's maybe the biggest learning from that time when I was interviewing for that role and joining
In fact, maybe we can brainstorm towards the end of this conversation what question you could have even asked. But
I
let's
would
keep
love that.
going with the story. And I also want to
Yeah.
point out to everyone something that you told me very clearly early on, that this story is not about throwing anybody or anyone or any company under the bus. I think that's really important to point out. What do you want to say about that so people know?
Yeah. So I think this story is really a story of living the experience and then reflecting on the experience. And I think that while I was living the experience, I struggled, I was frustrated. I took my story and my perspective to a number of different people, trying to find a solution that helped me do the thing that I thought I was hired to do, that I wasn't seeing us do. And upon reflection, what I realized was that I was actually missing a piece of information. My assumption was incorrect. Or maybe my assumption was somewhat correct, but it didn't line up with some critical stakeholders and what they were trying to achieve. This was a company that was trying to go public. Our executive team was trying to take the company public and developing high quality user centered products that customers love to pay for and want to use. Some of that stuff takes a back seat when your goal is to take the company public. And while I was told that as part of my interview loop, I don't think that I internalized it at the level that I needed to understand it and use that in my evaluation of what's going on right now as I try to navigate what's happening and make decisions as a design leader and as a peer across the product design organization in the company, even as a manager to my reports. I hadn't internalized that as much as in hindsight, I realized I should have because I saw a lot of this behavior in hindsight was, look, we have one goal. It is go public. And anything else right now is just optional.
So, in the spirit of telling yourself something, I want to say something to people who are listening to this, found this episode, and are in the very first job where you realized something's bigger is happening and you didn't ask the right questions about it. Welcome to reality. That's what ends up happening to all of us as we get more senior is none of us quote unquote do it the right way because there's too many factors. So some of you are hearing this and saying, I just got into this job and I just realized this is happening with me. And that does not make you dumb or negligent in your interview process. That's what happens, right? It's totally normal. And we don't know until we're there that
Right. And this is exactly what I'm saying is I be kind to yourself, maybe is the play that I'm gonna I'm gonna run here, but I'm not talking about this as I'm so stupid for having not realized this. It's really, gosh, I wish I could go back in time and tell myself, hey, remember, if people are not behaving the way that you expect, you probably don't know the whole story. And go
it.
find out
That
what the whole story is.
that's it. That's it. That's this episode, which is there's there's an old recording that my dad loved, which is Carl Reiner and Mel Brooks, who are two old school comedians, and they do a series of skits called the 2013-year-old man. And Carl Reiner is interviewing Mel Brooks, who is this 2013-year-old man, and he asked about the discovery of religion, and Mel Brooks says, "Oh, we all used to worship Phil. Oh, Phil, please protect us. This guy named Phil, don't step on us, don't poke our eyes out. Amen." And then one day, Phil was outside the cave and was struck by lightning. And they all said, oh, there's something bigger than Phil. There's something bigger than Phil, just to resonate. And so this is your there's something bigger than Phil moment. There's a bigger puzzle that you're not seeing. So let's talk about how you discovered that. So we now know with hindsight that the bigger puzzle was this company was dead set on going public and that nothing was going to ever be more important to some of the key decision makers than that, and that mattered to your life. So let's tell us about discovering that.
Yeah, maybe I'll start at this sort of anti-discovery, which is they didn't say that. They did say it, like we're all focused on going public. But the sort of second part of that sentence, at all costs, or everything else is going to take a back seat, or like I'm not even sure what that is because it wasn't ever said. I think that is a place that is hard to fill in. That's a perspective, a leadership perspective. And oftentimes leaders don't communicate those things. And so for me, that was a real learning is okay, so there might be more. And how should I go about finding that out? And so I actually didn't come from that perspective. Instead, I came from, hey, hang on, we need more like product vision. We need more corporate vision. We need more clarity so that the rest of us can behave in a way that's more autonomous, but aligned to where the company is going. And it's hard to take the fairly abstract, we need to go public at that is our number one goal, and tell an individual contributor designer, okay, go do this because we need to go public.
No.
That's a really big jump. And
And Mark Weeman says it's anathema to good design, but sometimes the goal of a feature is to have the feature.
it
Totally right.
is, yeah,
I realized a long time ago that I was walking around thinking if I just asked the right executive at the right time what they wanted me to do, they would tell me. And I had this massive facepalm moment where I realized they don't know. So, in saying that, we wish we had the second part of the sentence. I think what everybody should learn from this too is they don't have it. They might not sure they're aware they want to go public, but they may not even be able to or want to articulate how much of a driver that is
yeah.
in their decision making. So luckily though, everybody, there aren't that many bigger pictures there could be. There's some, but there's business is business and it acts the way it acts. Like we're running out of money. We're trying to sell the company. We're trying to go public. We're merging. We're having a giant fight among the leadership team. There's not an endless list. And because we're good at looking at things and analyzing systems, often we can figure out what that is.
Yeah. And I'm pretty comfortable with that normally. A lot of my background is in pretty small startups. I've been a first employee, I've been a 20th employee a couple of times, first designer multiple times. And I do not run away from ambiguity. Instead, one of the things I actually pride myself on is being able to go have a conversation with the CEO or whomever to say, hey, help, let's unpack this together so that we can get some clarity, so that you can do that second part of the sentence communication, so that I can go provide some vision to the design team for them to understand without coming and asking me every time, does this align to what we should be doing? Does this align to what we should be doing? Instead, I can set that high level alignment and then they know. And then when they present, they can say, look, we know we're supposed to align to this, and this solution aligns to that better than this other solution.
Except they
And
can't do that either. So Jesus just said, listening to one of your prior episodes, I hadn't realized that senior leaders might not actually know what they are doing or what's going on or how to do it, which is such like, Jesus, I bet you had a moment listening to that where you're like, oh my God, oh my God. That's totally true. I know it's true. I've never articulated it before, but it's so true. Just becoming a senior leader it actually makes it more risky to draw a line in the sand and say, this is what's going on. So let's talk about some of the symptoms, right? Here you were, you had a team, you were absolutely trying to do the very best thing. You were being very careful about not designing for yourself and holding yourself rigorously to finding out what real users actually needed. And everything you were doing was to benefit the company, to make the product better.
right.
And what did you, what went, how did you sense a problem?
I felt it, but I would say like the biggest indicator was in my one-on-ones with my reports and the rest of the design team. This came up all the time. Where are we going? What are we doing? I'm not sure. I want to be able to make decisions and I don't know how to make them. I come to reviews and I don't know what I'm going to get feedback wise because it's up to everyone's feeling. We're not aligned to this sort of like higher level goal.
Alignment. And so that's my whole thing, right? So corporate underpants is the problem. Aligning executives and aligning stakeholders is the solution. And the way I like to do that is this alignment persona process, which has nothing to do with data. It has to do with giving executives or stakeholders an exercise where they can change the conversation and get all their assumptions out on the table, see that they're not aligned and align them, which has nothing to do with data. Because until you know what those assumptions are and until they know that they're not aligned and they're talking past each other, data has no place in that
Yep.
because they're all so dead set on what they think they're thinking. So Jesus answered yes, and that's why I struggled to figure out what my goals in my role was supposed to be over years of work after asking over and over again, because it's not there. The amazing thing about business goals and business clarity is never inappropriate to ask for, and it never exists. If you assume that business goals and clarity do not exist, that will change your life as a leader in product, because then you can help them create it, not just wander around wondering where the hell it is.
And to talk for just a second about data, I feel like data has been such a strong part of corporate storytelling in the last few years. But a thing to remember is all data is a measurement. And if you're measuring the wrong thing or you don't know what you're trying to achieve, no measurement is going to help you figure out whether you're on your path to that or not. You have to know what you're trying to achieve first, and then you can figure out how do I measure that. And so data can be I love data and I'm very like a data informed designer. You ask anybody I've worked with, I love talking about data and how important it is to have, but having the right data and making sure the data is aligned to what you're trying to achieve is critical. Otherwise, it's noise.
Also, it's just so easy for anybody to sidestep data,
Yeah.
especially now,
Mhm.
given that data no longer means anything and reality doesn't exist. If you present really strong data to an executive and they don't agree, it's super easy to come up with 10 reasons why the data must be wrong, or that you collected it wrong, or asked slightly the wrong question, or said which instead of that in the survey question. Okay, so let's get back to you. Your team was like, "Mike, help. We don't know what the hell is going on. We don't know how we're being measured. We're trying to do good work." And you're like, "Think of it. I don't know either." So what did you do?
Yeah, I did what I've done in the past, which was I went and listened. And I put my research hat on to go have conversations with peers, with my manager, with other sort of executives, and tried to get the lay of the land. I wanted to understand, so what do we think we're doing? What do you think we're doing? That's interesting because I talked to somebody else last week and they said something different from what we're doing. And the why, obviously the why is really important. And as I did that and tried to continuously build the story, the kind of company wide story for what are we doing and why are we doing it, I just saw a lot of diversity in the sort of the answers for the what and the why. And it led me to a conversation with our CEO who, again, going
Diversity.
back.
Hold on. Diversity in the answer to the question, what and why.
Yeah.
Hold the phone.
Okay.
Because that is an awfully diplomatic way to put that. I found some diversity in the answers to the questions, what and why. The reason I'm stopping there is holy crap. Like you go to the people above you and you realize there's some diversity in the question, answer to the question. So say more. That's a shock the first time you experience it. You almost can't believe it's happening, right?
Yeah. I think for me, I didn't realize it at the time. It wasn't that shocking because, again, I've worked in a lot of small startups where we don't know. I think that, again, I was making an assumption where in a larger organization with many more employees, the assumption was we're going to be more aligned. We have agreed on this. I missed the meeting, or I didn't read the memo, or I wasn't keeping up with Slack, or,
Like I
you
just missed
know?
Slack message. It's so fun. Okay, go ahead.
Right, and I love to see Jason Giles just said, "Join the club," and so it's nice to see that I'm not alone. The the diversity in that was surprising and not surprising, but yes, one of the things that I found was in the vacuum of having a kind of top-down answer, everyone developed their own answer, and that led to the organization pulling in a lot of different directions. It wasn't that efficient, and I don't know. I guess I could have gone and created my own additional pull in another direction, but I continued the search.
That is so powerful what you just said, and it's so fundamentally human. In the absence of clarity, first of all, you're not the only one who felt like they missed the meeting. So picture the lives of the executives you were talking to. You were asking them fundamental questions they should have the answer to, and they didn't know the answer. The response to that was not them immediately and maturely thinking, we have some work to do as an executive team. The response to that in their brain was, oh, fuck, I must have missed that meeting too. And it is politically impossible to go into a senior stakeholder meeting and raise your hand and say, I've lost track of what our business goals are and what our direction should be. It's suicide politically.
Yeah.
Well, they can't do that. And all of you know as I'm saying this, that's humanly true. And somehow we forget about that as people become more senior. None of them were there for the meeting too because the meeting never happens.
Yeah. I will say too that to acknowledge like that is real. Most of these conversations that I had were one-on-one conversations because to get people to have a real conversation, it's hard to do it outside of a one-on-one conversation.
You can't because everybody's so defensive and scared. And it's much more risky to say, I thought our direction was to build more rockets for Wile E. Coyote. Because the chances that you're right are minuscule compared to all of the other things that could have been. Now, I thought we were doing parachutes for Roadrunner.
Yeah.
So why would you even put your neck out on the line? Okay, so you found this diversity in responses.
As a leader, sometimes it's important to
It's diplomatic.
be diplomatic.
Yeah, that's very kind. I call that clusterfuckery, but let's keep going. Diversity of the answers. And so then what happened? You went to the source.
Yeah. So eventually it led me to go have a conversation with the CEO because I hadn't found the answer that I was looking for at any other level. And I will say, I have a lot of empathy for somebody in that position. There are probably a lot of there are things, talk about things you don't know about. I'm not in board meetings. I don't know how the board is influencing this person. I don't know what else is going on. I don't know how they're compensated. There are just a lot of things I don't know. And the CEO kind of was willing to take the meeting and we had what felt like a really good heartfelt, understanding conversation, and thing changed. I didn't get an answer. A lot of our conversation was like, I was brought in to do this, and this is the part of the house that was on fire, and so I paid attention to that part of the house. And so this is what I've been doing, and I hear you, and I think I could focus more on that. And we left on a positive, sort of forward-looking note, and I hope that meant that things were going to change, but they did not.
Okay, so let's put a little bullet on that too.
Yeah.
If you have a meeting with the CEO of anyone who's been a CEO before or has some experience, you will leave that meeting feeling really good. You will leave that meeting feeling heard. You will feel like you got a little bit of an inside track into understanding what they're thinking that they haven't shared with anybody else, that they've been more open with you than you even thought they could be. And that this absolutely means that you would help them think in a new way. These people are not necessarily sociopaths, but people who are in a position of power are used to puzzles that are very large. And they are very used to how to handle each individual piece of that puzzle without disrupting anything. And that's what it takes to run a company. The puzzle is bigger than anybody thinks. So we're all focused on our particular piece of the puzzle, and the puzzle is much bigger. Like the analogy here is there's this great show called The Diplomat, and it's about a diplomat. And there's the main character at some point does all these machinations to make sure that she protects people in a particular port or harbor in the UK from something that's terrible that's could have happened. Then the VP comes and visits her and pulls her aside and circles the UK and says, "This is your puzzle board." Then the VP circles the whole map and says, "This is mine." And this is how you optimizing in this little part for the UK actually could cause hundreds of thousands of injuries or whatever in the larger board. That was such an intense image for me. The puzzle is bigger than you think, and there's delicacy to each interaction. So you left the meeting feeling pretty good,
Yeah.
and that something was likely to change, and then
Nothing changed.
nothing changed. So how did you feel about that? What did you think? Come
I
back
mean,
and tell your team, "Oh my god, great news. He heard
yeah,
me."
I definitely told my team, "Hey, I talked to the CEO and it sounds I feel heard." And but at the same time, there was no commitment to on this date I'm going to deliver this kind of vision or anything like that. And so I think people in a way gave a little bit more hope to folks, but that wears off again pretty quickly when you don't see anything change. And I think I really the illustration of circling the UK and circling this sort of my game is bigger. I will say that I heard that from my manager while I was there. They talked about that with me. And again, I think that I just didn't quite internalize it as much as I realize I could have now. Obviously, hindsight, it's 2020. It's way easier to think about that now than when I was in the moment. But I think that that is the crux. This game is bigger than you think it is. The UK for me was go design and deliver excellent products to keep the company flywheel going so this is a successful company. And the actual game at the CEO or board level or executive level was much bigger. And that's ability to recognize that is the thing that I wish I could go back and tell myself.
And the interesting thing here too is that you would think that your desire to improve the flywheel, meaning get more purchases, get more stickiness to the product, increase number of subscriptions, whatever it was that Acme was selling. How could that not be associated with the goal to take the company public? But it turns out that actually, sure, it's important, but it was small compared to whatever the other considerations were. So it's mind bending, right? How could this not be a priority? And the
Yeah.
truth is, it isn't necessarily. Maybe growth in the numbers is not required to get a good valuation. It's much more about the schedule of the IPO and the lawyer's timeline. And
I
so,
think something you said earlier really resonated with me that's worth talking about now. And that is like CEOs, executives, like we're all humans at the end of the day. And assuming that they have thought these things through, it's not a good assumption to make. And sure, if I were trying to like map out what does a successful X look like, in this case, we're talking about going public. Sure, like healthy product growth and meeting product goals is one thing that I would put on that list, but maybe it wasn't on the list, or maybe it got put on and the way that it showed up for those of us who weren't in those executive meetings wasn't as clear. And so felt like that box had been checked on the executive side. But then when it came to the sort of operational teams, it wasn't clear that it was checked and we didn't know what to do. And so we had
and
people
and
like
Mark
me
is
talking
asking,
about try and
yeah,
find out.
Mark was asking a great question that actually we might not have the answer to, which what were the other considerations?
Yeah.
I'm putting you on the spot because I don't even know if I mean, I guarantee one of them was that everybody wanted to optimize their own personal gain.
Yeah. Yes. Like we all had equity in the company and executives tend to have outsized equity relative. So the outcomes for them are going to be, it's like even more impactful to have a positive outcome when you do something like go public. Again, though, I don't think that's not the kind of thing. Like I didn't go, how much, like, how much how many dollars are on the line here for the C-suite? So how important is this problem if I'm measuring it in dollars, right? If I had
Interesting.
done that, I might have gone, oh my gosh, I need to go talk about like that with them because clearly that is not a thumb on the scale. I don't even know what the right metaphor is, but that's clearly going to be incredibly important, maybe more important than anything I can think of.
And you may not be able to go and say, how much money are you going to make from this CEO? But having that in your mind, we talked in advance when we were preparing for this interview about what question you could have asked the CEO. And one of the thoughts I had was, first of all, did you know that you guys were going to IPO? Did you know that was in the plan or was it secret?
It wasn't secret. It was like an open secret, I would say. It was the plan in a way where it kept getting talked about, but we didn't really actually tie like what was the engineering, product, and design org doing. It wasn't super tightly coupled to going public. We ended up doing a bunch of initiatives that, in hindsight, lined up to that, but it wasn't necessarily that we had aligned that way.
What would be a good question you could have asked the CEO? And I had my thoughts about that. Do you have your thoughts about that, about what you would ask today?
Yeah, I would have gone back and said, let's get really clear. Like, what is the outcome you're trying to achieve? And how can the product design team best support you in that? And that could be anything from working on features to helping you think through what you're trying to achieve. The menu there is really broad with design. We have such great methodologies that can be used in almost any way. And again, I've done that in the past and I actually really enjoy doing it. And I think this is one of those places, and I'm a tiny bit on my design soapbox here, but this is one of those places where I think design, even in companies that are user centered and value design, it can be forgotten that these design methodologies are really powerful. It's part of why product has taken up a number of them over the past few years. And so I would have tried to make that menu of like, how can I help? Really, I would have asked, how can I help? And make the menu of how can I help really.
Yeah, because there's no reason why you can't go in and say, listen, the grapevine is saying that we might IPO. You don't have to answer that question because maybe you can't, CEO. But what you could tell me is, how can I help achieve whatever it is that is the most driving goal? It could be that the answer to that is create this stupid feature that our competitor has that we need a box on as competitively relevant, even though it's the dumbest feature you ever heard of. That's not user centered, but it's company centered. And it's less crazy making than just assuming that the right thing to do is quote unquote the right thing to do. So Justin has a couple of really interesting comments. Justin Doherty says it's faster to swim with your face in the water, but you can't breathe when you do. If the exec team requires constant breathing, e.g., short-term positive profit, then teams need to re-optimize to swim more slowly with your face out of the water. Another interesting analogy. And we absolutely can, I think, make it so that the environment is better for us to do the great work that we need. But we have to recognize that kind of first, we have to satisfy what they think they need. Because until you give a powerful person what they think they need, I've made this analogy before in Jeff's meetings at Amazon. It was a known thing. First, you show Jeff the thing exactly the way Jeff described it, even if you thought it was the dumbest thing in the world, and then show the better alternative. If you start with the better alternative, all Jeff's thinking about is the one that he's got in his mind. It's the same thing here. You can't there's some things that you can't kill, but you can deliver them and then get yourself some room for some better stuff. And Justin S. has another nice comment here. Possible corporate vetting question. Can you show me a feature in the current product that the design team is most proud of? What's the next one coming up? And the goal is to see if the design team has any influence to win debates and influence of direction and in a way that they are proud of. Bonus values, see if you like their designs. What do you think of that?
I like that. I feel like there aren't a lot of organizations I work for that are willing to say we're not user centered or we don't want design to play a larger role in product leadership. But when the rubber hits the road, that's not typically the case. And I love the idea of vetting it in that way. And as we know from research, people will say things until the cows come home, but what they do often isn't what they say. And so I love the idea of actually doing a test.
What they do is not what they say. We know that so clearly about
Oh,
users, and we never think about it
so true.
for stakeholders and executives.
Yep.
What they do and what they say do not match. And why are we so shocked by that when it comes to the executive team?
Well, to Jason's comment earlier, it must be me. I think it's easy to forget as folks who practice product and design. it's easy to forget that the tools that we use with our customers and to do our work can be used on corporate underpants, can be used on corporate culture, can be used internally. And so some of those times I'm like, oh, it must be me. And I forget I've got these tools where I can find out, is it me? Is it not me? Can I test this? And use all those great tools we have. It's easy to forget.
Yeah, and so I use this tornadoes and earthquakes analogy, but you had another analogy about problems with just going into building something.
Oh, you're gonna have to remind me. That was
Quicksand.
oh yes, quicksand. Oh my gosh. Yeah. So the way that we talked about this was I thought I was brought in to lead a team to help build a great house. And nobody told me, and I didn't check to see what the ground was like before we started building the house. And it turns out, not quicksand like we got sucked in and everything failed and everybody died, but like the ground shifted underneath us. And what we thought was what we could count on wasn't actually what we could count on. And I think that that's more often than not the case. And like, what a lesson to learn.
I know because we are all so focused for a certain amount of our careers on getting better and better at the tools and techniques to physically build the house, to
Yeah.
coordinate the project, to be forward looking, to make sure that it has the right number of rooms, to all of those things. And when we suddenly realize that we know how to do all those things, and then we look down, and one of the like foundation elements of the house is like, sinking by 3 inches a day. It's like, it doesn't matter how good you are at that, and it doesn't mean that you can't get good at it, though.
Right. But I think that again, going back to your diplomat example, that is where we, whether we're responsible for the UK or something larger, that is where we go in order to do my job of taking care of the UK, I actually need to think about Western Europe. Like I have to, even though it's not technically my job, I need those skills in order to do my job well, in order to take care of the people that I have to take care of. And again, like that's one of those learnings. It's just once you hear it, you're like, of course, but you don't, it's a hard learned lesson.
And I like to create cute names for things, and so my name for this is puzzle perspective,
Mm,
right?
no.
We have to get good at puzzle perspective, trademark pending, I'm kidding, but puzzle perspective as a skill, right?
Yeah.
And we can absolutely learn that. And we can absolutely learn too that in the diplomat, what this meant was that some people in the UK were going to get deadified. There was going to be some kind of attack that was going to lose some lives. Never okay, unless you think about the 100,000 people who would get deadified in the bigger picture. And even then, still not okay. But the actions and reactions, the puzzle perspective changes everything for you as a leader too.
Mhm.
And then it also puts you in the challenging position of your team not understanding necessarily why you're making the decisions you're making. Because a certain amount of transparency is and is not okay.
Yeah.
Because for the people working for the diplomat, her saying, I'm totally okay with 10 people in the UK getting killed wasn't okay. And so then you become part of the problem.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know. I think I would welcome that problem. I would like to solve that problem instead of guessing at what the bigger map is, the bigger puzzle.
Right. Because it's going to impact you anyway. Duncan Shingleton says, or you can change the type of house you're building. Right. You can put a house on floats, or you can build a house like they do in Thailand that's raised up to
Right.
accommodate the new foundation.
Yeah.
Okay. So we've got about 15 minutes left. People send in questions as you want to, but let's talk about what you would tell yourself, what you might do differently, anything that you know now that might be useful for people just suddenly finding themselves in this situation.
I might start actually right where we just were, which is in that puzzle perspective idea. I think that that works both in this case that I'm talking about, but it also works if you come into a new team or something changes on a team where you're trying to understand how are my engineering peers, how are my product peers, how are my design peers, how are my marketing peers, how are they motivated, how are they measured in their jobs, and understanding that actually those are constraints which we often do not put down as constraints when we write our documents for these things. We frame our problems and we create projects. I would think about that puzzle perspective at sort of additional levels of altitude. It plays with the CEO when I can't figure out what to do with my design team and I want more vision, but it also plays with like, why am I having friction with the VP of engineering? These are great ideas. We've talked about this in the past. Why is it not working? And I think getting back to like research first principles, not making assumptions, going and asking the dumb question to find out like what's going on so that you can be informed or at least say that you did it. You can say I tried and I did my best with what I tried.
Yeah, I think, and Jason Giles says, who's also a great person to know about in our field, a possible question to ask is based on my puzzle piece, what does success look like? And so this align before design process that I have is all about these 5 conversations. And the first one is business goals Mad Libs, which is what numbers have to change by how much and what time period to know that this was a success. And so you can, and you also can't just go up to the VP of whatever and say, what number do you want me to change in 3 months to know this is a success? They can't answer you. But what you can say is, I think that one of these 3 might be the most important. We need to reduce subscription cancellations by 15% within 3 months. Or is it 15% or is it 75%? And or is increasing the number of new account holders by 10% in the next 3 months? Which one is more important?
Yep.
Then they can forward that on as if they want to cure your confusion, but you never present them with a blank page.
Yeah.
And I think being willing to ask the stupid questions is also maybe is write the stupid statements.
I think it's again with a bias toward design, I think it is make the abstract concrete. Oftentimes, I feel like a lot of the research books that I've read are, don't lead your research subject. However, when the rubber hits the road, one of the things that's really challenging for people who you're doing research with is to imagine the thing that you're talking about if you get to that stage. And so having something concrete, even if it is like straw man, totally wrong, purposefully wrong. Sometimes that's actually fun is put a landmine in there so that you know that this is not the right thing to get them to talk about something, to have something concrete to respond to. It People are not great at taking the abstract and making it concrete. And it's where misalignment happens all the time. It's one of the design superpowers. We get to make these concrete artifacts that people can then say, "Oh, no, I was talking about red, or I was talking about large, or I was talking about whatever. This is small, green." We are uniquely lucky to be able to have that as part of our role.
You just said, and that's something totally stealing as if I made it up. But absolutely, in this part of our jobs, we should lead the witness.
Yeah.
Like, we should be willing to put the thing out there that they can push back on and then allow them the opportunity to say, poor Mike, look how confused he is, boss. What should I tell him to get him more on your level? Meanwhile, your boss is, I have no idea. And so, but it's okay because then you're the poor, misinformed, whatever.
Yeah.
But asking these basic questions is it takes a lot of bravery, but it becomes powerful when you get to a point in your career where you realize that saying, I don't know is maybe the strongest indicator of your abilities, right?
Yeah. And I think as we get more senior too, again, design focused, but I think this is, to your point, relevant to anyone, is making that concrete thing. Like in the design world, that might be a wireframe or a mock or a prototype or something like that. But as you get more senior, that thing ends up being language oftentimes. And sure, it might be paired with something visual, but imagine that I could go back in time and have that conversation with the CEO. And instead of talking about it and having to have him trying to understand whether he understands me or not, him saying he does, whether he does or not, if I had put in front of him 3 statements for our number one priority is A, our number one priority is B, our number one priority is C. And he'd go, no, D, it's not on here, Mike. Like it's actually this. But the forcing function of saying, is it one of these is it's like such a strong strategy to employ in communication.
Yeah, and he may not know. So he may
Right.
not suddenly have realized because you put A, B, and C in front of him, you suddenly realize, oh, maybe it's D, right? And then you have to support that thought process. So one of the most powerful things you can do at any level in your career, if something is confusing, create a glossary and ask people for their definitions of common words, and you're going to find that they're all over the place. And you have to be careful because this can be a tricky thing to do. Again, present something so that people can say it's wrong. And then a different set of vocabulary words, which is what the alignment persona process is all about, is getting them to change their debates.
Yep.
The other thing that can happen as you're more and more senior is as you're looking at jobs, one of the questions you can ask companies somehow carefully is what fight are you hiring me to end? Often when companies are hiring a very senior person, they're doing that because 2 of the existing senior people can't agree with each other. And the exact wrong thing is to bring in another senior voice who is then going to be an empire builder. Okay,
Uh,
let's see. Go ahead.
I would love to know if that was what I was being hired for. I was hired for that in my past, and it's not a fun it's not a fun role to find out that's what you were hired for when you, again, thought you were hired for something else.
I think when companies think they should hire a super senior person is exactly when they shouldn't. They're inevitably going to hire the wrong person because they don't understand the problem, which is why, of course, they should pay me lots of money to come in. And yeah, it takes an outside person. And sometimes that outside person does exactly what you said. And I've done this, which is throw a hand grenade into the middle of the living room. And then everybody gets so startled that they can then react. You can be the enemy for a minute
Mhm.
and they can get past what struggles they were having. Alan Fliegelman says, fully love this idea of leading the witness with tangible options they can select. Have learned a lot asking cross-functional teams to rank OKRs and see and work through these misalignments. So I know right now you are considering what's your next adventure.
Yeah.
How has your consideration process changed? What are you doing differently now as you think about what adventure you wanna have next professionally?
Yeah, in case it wasn't clear so far in this conversation, I'm trying to make sure that I'm not making assumptions in the same way that I have in the past, because I feel like slowly as I become more and more senior, I'm removing more and more assumption from my searches and trying to make that stuff explicit, but also with the awareness that I probably will never be able to turn that completely off, like I'm a human. But I'm really doing more introspection to understand what are the things that I get energy from? What are the things that I struggle with? Like, where do I want to grow? I think I do that in every role, but I feel like after every role, I've learned a bunch of new things, hence this conversation. And I'm putting that on the list as I go. There's I don't know if you've ever experienced this, but I remember when I lived in New York, I rented an apartment once where, every lease has a rider, and the rider has like this list of special rules that are not the general part of the lease. And it just made me laugh so hard. And I was like, oh, clearly every single one of these things has happened to this landlord. And they don't want me to, I'm not allowed to have a bird that lives in the bathroom because something happened with a bird.
Yeah.
And I do feel like I like shook my head and was like, oh, that's so silly. But one of the things I'm realizing as I get more senior is I'm slowly building my rider of what are the things that are absolutely cannot handle this because of past scar tissue. And I think, especially in a job market like we've had in the last couple of years, it can be easy to jump to the first opportunity that comes your way. And I feel like as I've gotten clearer on what are those like non-negotiables or like big red flags, or I need to be really careful about this and acknowledge that it's here, that has been really powerful for me in evaluating roles. But also, as I'm just like out searching, like it's helped me narrow the search. And that's been really powerful. And it just keeps happening as I continue to grow and change.
And this is where actually so one of the things I told you about is this huge volunteer network that I'm part of called Never Search Alone, and the idea of these job search councils which are like AA for job seekers, right? It's this 11-week program with all these exercises, no higher power, no politics, nothing. But where people get together and peer mentor each other through figuring out what they want to be when they grow up, even if they're already grown up. And part of the process is if you get an interview, actually creating OKRs as part of the interview process, which can also help you with this. And so you can actually review those with the hiring managers. Like in 6 months, what numbers will have changed by how much if you hire the right person? And either that's something you feel like you can deliver on spectacularly, or maybe it's not. It would be a boomerang job and it'd be the same problem. And then the other thing is negotiating, not just on salary and time off, but also on the riders. So I joke there would have to be a rider that I would have a $20,000 budget for sticky notes, not having a bird in the bathroom.
Right.
But you can involve some of these questions in your consideration set that are going to help.
Yeah. And the idea of the OKRs, if they don't have answers to those questions, like that's really telling too. No?
Totally. Or if they say, if they react badly to you even coming up with them, then you're like, what? Bye bye.
Right.
All right. So we've just got a few minutes left. What do you want to tell people?
Oh, whoa.
Put you on the spot.
Okay. I didn't have the what I want to tell people queued up, but I think the what I want to tell people is there are a few things. Give yourself grace is one. Like I am pretty hard on myself. And we talked about before, oh, it must be me. Like that is a failure mode. It's something that I'm working to improve. it's not necessarily you. Might be you, but give yourself some grace. If things are not behaving the way you expect, you're probably missing a piece of information. I know I almost said that exact same thing before, but man, that is, I don't know how to put that as a pithy title, but that's maybe what I would title this episode, or Jason, or the puzzle perspective, or I think that was yours. But I think that like those two are big ones. And then I think just patience. Like I am not a patient person, and I worked my way through the organization, and I probably irritated people because I didn't go with, here's my map of this situation. Does that match your map of the situation? And I think if I had been a little bit more patient and spent some time doing some of that, like making some of those things concrete, I probably could have done it in a more productive way. And think about that. Think about what it's like. This is classic design empathy hat, but what's it like to be the other person? How do you see them as motivated? And what can you do to go in and show them that you understand and that you want to understand? I think that's a huge way to open the door to people to being more frank and clear with you.
And I guess the one yes and that I want to add to that is this is a super fun new puzzle for you as you
Yep.
get old, as you get more senior. If we all stop getting grumpy about this and wondering why people aren't listening to us, and instead are like, ooh, this is a delicious new puzzle. We have all the training it takes to solve this puzzle.
Yep.
Human brains and behavior and organizational dynamics and psychology. That's our happy place. It's just we have to look again, that perspective is this is super fun, a puzzle, if you embrace it.
Yep.
So I can't thank you enough. Mark says lots of awesome advice and learnings. Mike, thank you for
Thank you,
sharing.
Mark.
I can't thank you enough for your willingness to be vulnerable and open with this amazing story about Acme Incorporated, which I think a lot of people are going to go to your LinkedIn and try to figure out what company it was. Also, to all of you who listened out there today, we're really honing in on the topic of corporate underpants. If you think other people are interested in these conversations, please share. Please also go to Apple Podcasts and leave a review or something so we can start spreading the word. Or if you think you know a great person to be on as a guest, let me know on corporateunderpants.com. Thank you for your time, for your attention. Mike, I'm so in love with your brain. Thank you. And we all can't wait to see what you do next. So all of you go follow Mike, right?
Yep. DMs
And
are open if you want to chat.
absolutely. And Mike will come in and answer a lot of the comments that you've had here. And that's about it for Corporate Underpants this time. I just released today the episode with Jared Spool, a debate about things we mostly agree on. The next episode to be released will be my amazing conversation with co-author of Aligned, Melissa Appel. A live interview with her co-author, Bruce McCarthy is coming next week, and Corporate Underpants, the newsletter, will always tell you what's coming up and what's being posted. Thank you all so much. Keep your underpants clean, everybody. Thank you for joining me for another episode of Corporate Underpants, and there's lots more to come. If you have any projects that you need my help on, if you're interested in coaching to become a senior product leader through understanding alignment in politics, or if you're interested in any of the classes or books that I'm developing, please visit my website, adlininc.com, and get in touch.